Good evening from Munich. Thank you for tuning in to this live webcast. We're at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we've got a very high-profile panel here to discuss the issue of Rio and the future of population growth and the future of sustainable development. My name is Joe Confino. I'm an executive editor of The Guardian and chairman of Guardian Sustainable Business. And just to introduce the panel, on my right we've got Bjorn Stigson, who's the president of the council. We've got Peter Baker, who is the president designate of the council. Then Barbara Cox, who's the member of the management board of Siemens. Chad Halliday, who's chairman of the board of Bank of America. And Michael Morris, who's chairman and chief executive officer of the American Electric Power Company. So I say welcome. I just wanted to kick off, Bjorn, by asking you. You were at the beginning of the sort of progressive business coalition that came out of the first Earth Summit. We're now coming up to Rio +20, and I just wanted to ask you to spend a minute or so just saying, from where we were 20 years ago, how far have we come? And how much has progress been slower or faster than you imagined?
Well, first of all, progress has been slower, I think we can say. The first decade after Rio, there was a lot of enthusiasm. A lot happened, actually. I mean, there were a number of decisions in Rio. We created the Kyoto Protocol, the Millennium Development Goals. A lot happened up to Johannesburg. And then after Johannesburg, it was kind of an exhaustion. And the actions became weak and delayed. So the sum of the 2 decades from Rio means slower growth on pick-up of these issues and weaker implementation than what I expected once upon done.
And what do you put that down to? When you talk about exhaustion, what was the exhaustion? Because, I mean, the issues have actually grown more profound, not less.
Yes, but what happened was that a number of the difficult issues from Rio were not really implemented. There was, for instance, the decision that the rich countries were going to give 0.7% of GDP to the poor countries to help them deal with the environment, among other things. And that never happened, apart from the Scandinavian countries and Holland. The others didn't do it. You came up against a lot of challenges about the climate convention from Rio. That I think people saw that originally as an environmental agreement, but it was actually an economic agreement. And when you started to then discuss who's going to pay for what, then the reality came home that this was going to be more difficult.
Okay. And Peter, I mean, we're now coming up to Rio +20. Interview with Achim Steiner, the head of UNEP, last week saying there's no political leadership, we're not expecting much to happen at Rio +20. So we've got Bjorn saying the last 20 years has been too slow, and that actually it got ground down to pretty much a halt. And again, you know, the information, the science, all the information we have is that the problems are worse and are going to get worse. What can realistically the business community do to create change at Rio? I mean, is there going to be any movement? And what's the purpose of Rio if we're not going to see a seismic change?
Well, I would say the purpose has got to be we have to give it our best as the combined entities coming from government, NGOs, and business because of the urgency of the matters at hand. I'm not as pessimistic. It was only 2 years ago that I was in New York in a session in the UN that the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, he got up onto stage and he said the Millennium Development Goals cannot be met without the support of private sector. And this was never said before by somebody that high up in the UN. So the role of business as a contributor to solutions is now well recognized. Of course, the politicians have all kind of deviating priorities on their agenda, which indeed might not make Rio that successful if that's all we're going to bank on. But I look at that as an enormous opportunity for business to take the lead, to come up with ideas on where solutions can be found, to present them there, and to then hopefully get support from the policymakers in making those solutions become effective.
But do you really believe they're going to be effective? Because, I mean, it's all very well, business has been coming up with solutions, and often to a deaf ear from government and politicians and policymakers.
Yeah, but it's, I think the big gain that we've seen in the last 20 years is that the awareness amongst the general public for these issues has grown so much now. The willingness for business to take the responsibility in bringing those solutions has grown so much now. 20 years ago, social or corporate social responsibility were really new themes. Today, if you don't have a CSR policy, you're really not a recognized business anymore. The pressure that customers, consumers will put on business to come up with solutions, the hope that the governments now have that business will indeed step up to the plate, that to me is very fertile ground for some success. Maybe not the success the world needs, but certainly some success.
But isn't there a risk that as business steps up to the plate, actually, that politicians will actually just leave it to business and actually won't come in and support?
Yeah, that would not be the right outcome of it all. I can see the risk, given all the other priorities that the politicians have at this moment going for them. But without the right policies supporting these business solutions, we will have some short-term gains, but not the long-term impact that we ought to be looking for. So, I don't think there's any point in going to any meeting being pessimistic about the outcome. Then you're right, you might as well not have it. But if business comes forward, and through the World Business Council, we'll try to come up with some pretty concrete ideas by the time the meeting happens. If the business comes forward with real ideas, if the business engages constructively with the politicians to get support in terms of policies, in recognition, then I think we'll make progress.
Michael, from the American perspective, because virtually everyone I speak to, when they talk about America, they sort of groan, especially from the political side. So I know when I interviewed Bjorn the other day, he said the only group in America that's taking climate change serious is the intelligence and military community, because they see what's coming down the line. And that the politicians have abdicated their responsibilities to really face these issues and actually really put their efforts into, pushing for a green economy. I mean, what's your take on why the politicians are not responding?
That's an excellent question, and I think it goes back to something that Bjorn had said earlier, and maybe the same comment that Peter had made. We seem to be talking past each other. Corporate America has dedicated itself to a sustainable view of where we go. Our employees expect it of us, our customers expect it of us, the communities where we do business, our neighbors expect it of us. And in our business is a perfect example in a very small way. We use less water now. The emissions from our power plants are much cleaner now. What used to be a waste product, we now ship to people who make wallboard or sheetrock. It's a byproduct that used to be a waste product. So we've gotten there. Today, where we find ourselves, the politicians speak now of these great strides forward, and the technology is developing and available. Yet they say, after you say, good, we can do that, they say, but don't incur any costs. This is not a free move. Energy efficiency is available but not free. Technological changes are available but not free. Renewable energy is interesting but available and technologically solvable but clearly not free. So we have a huge disconnect politically to the business world. And because of the work Bjorn and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development have done, we're more ready to move than they are. Because theirs is, let's do all this, but let's not have any increase in the cost of anything. And that just is impossible.
And just the council is a coalition of progressive companies, but there are lots of corporations in America and politicians who are actually actively trying to sabotage progress.
Absolutely.
So what's the response that, from your perspective, how do you deal with these groups in society, in American societies that are actually trying to deny climate change, that are actually trying to stop change from happening? I mean, it seems, from the outside, it seems madness.
That's pretty accurate, because it seems mad from the inside as well. So what we do is, and we surely have that across our group of customers. So I have customers who are huge energy users, who may not have the same dedication to managing the environment the way that we might. And we try to share with them. On the other side of the coin, We serve the Walmart Corporation in the big box world, the most energy efficient corporation in the world, willing to share everything they know about energy efficiency in huge retail stores with anyone. So there are some shining stars, but yes, to your point, there are some people who would dump the refuse in the river behind their building if they could. That's why we have the laws that we have. And so frequently, corporate America gets painted with a very large brush. That's unfair. But and this isn't a phenomenon of America. I'm sure that we would hear that from any of the other countries being represented here. There are great players, and there are some players that just simply aren't up to the test. And at the same time, to the point you made, some politicians that want very hard to make sure none of this ever happens. So it is maddening. It's a good way to phrase it.
Chad, I mean, we're talking about Rio Plus 20 in a few months and what's happened in the last 20 years, but obviously the Council has developed the 2050 vision, which is saying by 2050 you're going to have 9 billion people, and the vision is that that can be done within the constraints of the planet, or in terms of resources, and taking everyone out of poverty. From a position of now, and the report, which is, it's in a sense the vision of the Council, says everything's in place for that to happen, in theory. But standing from this place, it looks like a pipe dream. It looks like impossible. I mean, when you look ahead, do you, everyone, because I hear everyone says, oh, I'm an optimist by nature. I'm optimistic. But a lot of the news is very pessimistic. What do you see is going to happen between now and 2050 to really make that sort of dream a reality?
I think a number of things. One is we have technology capability that we could not dream of 20 years ago. We have nanotechnology, we have biotechnology, we have such electronics technology that can help us get there. Second, I think we have business that understands arithmetic. We're at 7 billion people today. We don't have to wait for 9 billion people to find out we have a problem. The planet, the way we use it today, can handle about 4 billion people. And business understands that practicality. They can look at their supply chains and they can see they're going to have peaks in cost, if not just absolute shortages. And those shortages are going to come in a reasonable period of time. So progressive business is doing the right thing, not just for the environment and the planet, but they're doing the right thing for their shareholders at the same time. They're not in contrast with each other. So that's the encouraging part to me, because businesses understand arithmetic.
Well, you say business understands. Well, there's a certain small group of businesses that sit on this council that understand the issues, but there's hundreds of thousands of businesses that actually don't seem to recognize it and aren't acting, and actually don't want to actually see the future and change. So I'm just wondering, it's great that you have leaders, and hopefully those draw others up with them, but it seems that the system itself is at fault.
I hear what you say, but I respectfully disagree.
And why?
I think there are more. So Mike and I both have served on the Business Roundtable in the U.S., and we both had leadership roles in bringing all the businesses along. And what we found is if you're in businesses like utilities or chemicals, where I spent most of my career, we understand these issues sooner because we see them on the leading edge, but some other institutions don't. And we've educated them. We found more of them signing up to a program called Sea Change. They're actually seeing change happen. And this is some of the most influential businesses across all of the U.S., but only a dozen or so are members of this organization. So I think there's a lot more going on. By all means, we need more. This is not enough yet, but I'm actually encouraged that we're going to make a change. If I could focus just a little bit on Rio itself.
Yeah.
So we've got 190 countries coming. It will be challenging to get 190 of anybody to agree to something. So it would certainly be true with countries. But it's an opportunity for business to help them understand how we can be their partner. And if we miss that opportunity, we'll miss a big opportunity. Because that's what I think we must do at Rio, is show what we've accomplished, show what we're committing to in the future, and how these public-private partnerships, which I think are key to this future, can work together.
Barbara, just to clunk down a level to something more practical, which is we talk about 9 billion by 2050, but this week we've supposedly passed the 7 billion mark. We're having increasing numbers of people moving into cities. We've got enormous population growth, pretty much all exclusively in the developing world. From your perspective at Siemens, given you do a lot around infrastructure and cities, what can be done to make cities sort of more sustainable? Because especially in the developing world, you see cities just growing and growing often with very little planning, with actually higgledy-piggledy. You know, you've got a couple of sort of great cities in China that are being designed around being carbon neutral or whatever. What can we do just from a very practical point, just taking that as an example?
Well, I think we can do a lot, but just to come back to the previous discussion, I think it will not bring us further to talk, should it now be the politicians or should it be business? Honestly speaking, it will only work if this is being done together. And having the 7th billion inhabitant of this planet, Danija in the Philippines, I think it's our task as people, as members of this planet, to do something to make sure that she doesn't just have a scholarship from the United Nations, but she has a greener and a cleaner planet. Now, cities are important, clearly, because 75% of the CO2 output is already coming from cities. We all know city population will grow from 3.5 to about 6 billion in the future. And the great thing to that is, and that's why I'm optimistic, is, like you said, Jed, it's the technology. And just analyzing the technology we as Siemens have in our portfolio, we analyzed that thoroughly, and we can reduce the CO2 levels by 38%. 38%. So it's a very, very impressive figure. And just looking at 2010, our revenues with our green portfolio amounted to 28 billion euro, which is a substantial part, over a third of our total revenue already. And with these revenues, our customers are able to reduce the CO2 levels by 270 megatons. That's about 1/3 of the yearly German output. So cities, what we did, we made a very big study with London some years ago. We were able to analyze and prove to London, also to the city government, that 44% of CO2 reduction is possible until 2020 in this city. And there are some very concrete examples. For instance, we worked on the tolling system, which helped to reduce traffic congestion, which is a factor, as we all know, in London, by 26%. We were part of establishing the largest offshore wind farm of the world. It's the London Arrow. It's close to London, where we'll be installing 175 wind turbines, and it will provide energy, clean and green energy, for 750,000 households. Another example is, I mean, there are many examples. I could just go on.
What about in the developing world? Because you're talking, so you give examples in where infrastructure is very fixed and you can then create change. But what about in the developing world, where you are going to have this huge population growth and where things aren't as fixed? You know, are we going to leapfrog, or actually are we going to, how do we sort of start to sort out the problems there?
I think you exactly mentioned the right word. It's really a leapfrogging. I think the key thing, and the great thing is, of course, of the new cities, and I know exactly quite a big number of new cities is at this moment being designed and developed in China, as an example. And of course, the impact in the designing phase to make a city greener and cleaner is much bigger. So also there, we work with city planners, with city governance to ensure that already in the planning phase, the technology is there. Just one example, to have a kind of public transportation, a well-functioning, I'm coming from Switzerland. In Switzerland, we have an excellently functioning public transportation. That's why everybody is using it. And we still have traffic problems, of course, but not to the extent of like a city of New York or maybe Shanghai. So one key factor is in a new city that is just in the design phase to make sure you have very, very good public transportation system. You have green building technologies, and you really ensure that you have the latest technology. Now, there's also the way, you will probably ask the question about investments. So we also work, we call it SMART. So we are developing technologies for the emerging countries, for the developing world, which is also at lower cost. So it also becomes affordable. So that's the direction for helping developing cities to become greener.
And in terms of the more general point about sort of the green economy, so you're saying you're already putting the investment that you don't, so a lot of people say you need a political framework, you need consistency, you need a level playing field, you need government to show their support. Are you saying actually that business can actually just get on with it and actually from purely a profitability angle, you can just make it work?
I think we are an example of that. And our customers want this technology not just because it's green, but as we have heard before, because they save energy costs. They do. So it's an investment calculation. So that makes perfectly sense. But I would also like to say, if there were a political framework, and if there is, let's say, kind of a better agreement in one of the next COP meetings or in the Rio context, that certainly would accelerate. But nevertheless, look at the World Business Council. There are over 200 members. They represent $7 trillion revenue. So this is a big community. And just to work together and find solutions together, how we can make each other greener, has a very, very big impact. So we cannot always wait for the big solution, for the big global agreement on a better and a greener world, on global targets and all that. We can do a lot ourselves, which we're doing. But of course, if there was a better global framework and a better, let's say, global political understanding and targets, of course, that would certainly accelerate the rollout of this technology.
So Bjorn, just to move on after this point, but just going back to that sort of, because there are other big players in society that need to change, but in terms of that political business sort of relationship, if the case is so obvious about what needs to be done, what's preventing the politicians really from acting? You know, what actually? I know they've got lots to worry about at the moment, but what is it? What's the fear that is stopping them from just listening to the case and acting on it? What's going on?
Well, I think generally we have also to understand that politicians, like business leaders, have a broad agendas, and sometimes other things might take priority, not the least in a situation where we've had financial challenges. But there is also an issue of understanding. When you look at a number of important areas in society, we have market failures where markets alone cannot do things without proper regulation. If we take energy efficiency in buildings as an example, we know that about 35 to 40% of the world's energy is used in buildings. And it is very profitable for society to deal with energy efficiency in buildings. But when you look at the value chain, which is very fragmented, it might not be profitable for the individual actors. So if we rely on market forces only to drive energy efficiency in buildings forward with the speed that it would make sense from a societal perspective, it would take a very long time. So what we have been trying to do is to educate then governments and saying, this is in your interest. It's in business interest to drive it. But it takes time to get that understanding. And also because sometimes you simply lack the capacity in society. You don't have people that can actually do the job unless you then provide education and other matters. So there is a time dimension to this. But I agree with my colleagues that a lot is happening. And I think it's easy to sometimes forget where we were like 20 years ago in Johannesburg. And you look at the enormous change that has happened, not the least in mindsets over these 20 years. You know, it's like being on a train. And the train is moving forward, and you're walking in the train, and it looks like you move rather slow. But there is a train that is moving forward on this. So let's not paint the picture that nothing has happened. It's been slower than what I expected, as I said at the beginning. But a lot has happened in preparing for more action going forward.
Okay. Peter, just another big player in society is the financial community. There was a survey out not so long ago that asked business leaders, you know, what's one of the biggest blocks to moving forward, and they said it's in their investment community. And then they said, where are you putting your energy in terms of trying to create change? And the lowest one, the one that came out worst, was about forming a relationship and actually trying to put pressure on the investment community. So you have lots of companies that are saying, you know, consumers need to change their behavior and are putting all their energy there. But there seems to be very little pressure from business actually back to their investors to actually create change. And lots of people saying they're still stuck in short-termism. They are not responding. They're actually one of the key groups that is holding back movement. What's your view on that?
No, I would agree with the concern. I've recently stepped down as CEO of a listed company myself. And if you're not careful, you're easily trapped in a system of quarterly reporting, of short-term forecasts, of therefore not putting long-term investments and improvements onto the agenda. As a society, that is something we need to address. The short-term capitalism needs to be put under some form of a control, because without incentives from your investors, it becomes almost anarchy that then drives the really innovative type of projects into companies, which, as long as it's done on a small scale, you can do. But we're kind of out of the period of doing small-scale pilot things. We need big, concerted action in collaboration with many players. One of the key roles that I would like to see if we can develop more constructively is a dialogue with the pension funds. If you look at pension funds, they have very long-term liabilities, very high amounts of assets under management, and by nature, they should therefore have a longer-term perspective on the type of returns they make, on the type of society that we're going to create with the money we invest today. And I think there's a real role for responsible, long-term investment by pension funds that we need to tap into more than we've done so far. And I would agree, failing to do that will make it a much tougher business to get a broad action coming out of business than if we're able to go there.
Chad, you're in the finance business. So what's going on?
Well, I agree with many things Peter said, but not quite all. So let me just give you an example. At Bank of America, we set aside $20 billion to invest in sustainable projects that are a little higher risk or a little lower return than our base business. So we invest in much more sustainable projects than that, but these are the ones that wouldn't make the cut otherwise. Now, we don't do it just because we like to take risk. It is the right thing to do. But secondly, we're learning from those. So all of our employees are learning which projects work, which ones don't work. And so we can start advising our other customers about where the right investments are. So it's a learning project for us. So I believe it's a little bit the chicken or the egg. So if companies start making their case of why this is the right longer-term thing to do, it will return to shareholders. It might not be in the next 3 months, but it will be in a reasonable period of time. I think you'll find the investment community very receptive to that. And we haven't even talked about the big downside. So if somebody hasn't understand the sustainability of their supply chain, and all of a sudden they can't get the raw materials they need, or they're outcast because they're boycotted in certain places, that's a big liability. So I think there's another side with sustainability reporting that you can balance that out and be very successful.
But it seems that so you talk about what you're doing and your responsible investment, but a lot of the financial system is still based on those short-term returns, and that people, despite the sort of longer-term risks, which you say of supply chain management and securing resources, that doesn't seem to get back. You talk about the chicken and egg, but we still don't quite know which one came first. We're still discussing that one. At some point, what's going to break the logjam here? Because a lot of businesses that I speak to, they don't speak to their investment community because they'll be told not to invest. So there is a real problem here.
And I understand what you're saying. I think Peter's point around the pension funds is right. They have a very different investment portfolio. Some insurance companies have a very different investment portfolio. And maybe we're watching a little bit too much of TV. We should be reading good newspapers more in what we're doing. But I think when you start looking at the way the stocks move every 10 minutes, that's probably not the right thing for business people to do. If you ask me, why does private equity sometimes outperform public companies? Because they're making those longer-term decisions. They're not worried about what your stock did any one day or any one quarter. I think the more enlightened companies are starting to move in that direction.
And Michael, how does that impact how does this impact on your company and what you see out there in terms of your investors and your ability to invest in the long term? Because obviously, by its nature, your business is very long-term investment.
So our typical multi-billion-dollar capital investment is in a long-lived asset that, if well-maintained and well-produced by Siemens or someone, will last 50 years. So we always take a very long-term look at that. And in the utility business across the world, America included, the United States, raising capital is a very, very easy thing to do. It's understood the way that the model is set up across the world for the most part, that there's a pretty assurance of cash flow to service the debt that's incurred in taking out the investments. So when we talk to our stakeholders, it's we love the equity investors, obviously. We owe them a duty. At American Electric Power, we have paid dividends for 406 consecutive quarters. That makes us one of about 15 corporations in the United States. And our banks, we have never failed on paying back monies lent to us by institutions. So it's a very interesting commitment that we make in that regard. Long life, no question.
And Bjorn, from your perspective, from a systemic perspective, that we need the politicians to act, we need business to act. What's your view on the financial community?
Well, we have clearly ended up in a short-termism, and a number of our members, like Peter is saying, have reacted very clearly to that. And there is a growing debate in society about who has got what rights to decide about the future of the corporation. If you have a big chunk of the shares which is being traded in seconds by machine trading, or like our former chairman, Sam DiPiazza, said recently that the average holding of a stock on Wall Street is now 4 months. Now, the question will inevitably be raised going forward. If the shareholders hold the stock for 4 months and people are employed for many years and you have got commitments to local communities and other stakeholders, how do you balance the right to decide what the corporation is going to do? And I think if we don't start addressing this and are willing to take that debate in the business community, we will find that some of the fundamentals that underpin the capitalism that we see as a market capitalism will be challenged. And we see the demonstrations happening at Wall Street, in London, and so on. And I can see, I was in the universities in the 60s. I've seen the youth revolution in those days. It's not difficult to see a situation where we can get a very, very challenging debate about the fundamental underpinnings of the market system. And I think we have to get engaged in that debate from the business community. But let me also say that when we look at long-term capital like pension funds, the pension funds are in many parts of the world not free to invest how they want. If you take Europe as an example, infrastructure projects are being categorized as others in the category. And that means that they have a much higher capital coverage requirement than more risky investments. And the pension funds are very frustrated about this. So governments have created a situation where they cannot use the money for long-term infrastructural projects that is in their interest. So very often you find that when we are trying to address these issues, you cannot just look at one side of the coin, which is how does the market function. You also have to look at what are the rules that build up those markets. And people sometimes are looking at markets as if they were created by God. Markets are made up of rules, and those rules are written by human beings, and they are better or worse to serve the purpose that we are trying to achieve.
And the system's not that old.
No.
It doesn't go back into eternity, does it? It's a very recent phenomenon in human history.
Chad was also in his earlier time with us in the board of the World Business Council, a co-author of a report called Sustainability Through the Market, where we argued these issues. So we've been in this debate for quite some time.
Been in the debate for quite some time, but not necessarily, we're not, again, moving fast enough. But Barbara, from your perspective, how, because obviously you're showing that success of investment, but was that difficult to start up with? What's been the sort of short-potted history of Siemens in this area?
Well, but maybe just to add a little bit on the investors' question, I think you have answered already very comprehensively, but just a couple of elements to add. I think sustainability is also moving into, not just into the business world, but also in the investment world in different ways. On one hand, you have an increase in the kind of truly green funds, green investors. It's still a small part, but increasing. And then mainstream investors, they are looking for sustainability because they realize over time it's a better deal. And there are a couple of underlying factors to that. It has been proven by an NGO that sustainability leaders, companies that are good in sustainability, actually over time have a better stock market performance. So this correlation has been proven. So that's one factor. Second factor is companies are more and more transparent and are more and more open on sustainability reporting. Now, financial reporting is backward-looking. It's history. So actually you show the state of the company backward-looking. Sustainability reporting, I believe, is very much forward-looking. And if you take some of the indicators that are part of sustainability reporting, take employee engagement score. Now, would you invest in a company that has excellent financial figures, great cash flow, everything, but an extremely low employee engagement score? Probably you would think twice. Because the question here is, what is the reason? What does that mean for the future success of the company? So sustainability reporting, I think, is becoming more important, and it will create more sustainability also in the investment decisions.
Before you get on to, because I want to push on Siemens as well, but I was talking to Ian Cheshire, who's CEO of Kingfisher, which owns the B&Q chain, and he was saying actually that there wasn't any impact from investment community. They don't ask him any questions. They're not interested. They're actually, all they want to know is the financials, and actually they're not looking at sustainability. So it's all very well to say actually companies are looking more broadly, investors are looking more broadly at sustainability, but most analysts don't even ask the questions, and most investors don't even ask the basic questions. It's like, you're talking about Bjorn about education. It seems they need to go to primary school rather than anything else. But I mean, what is it really? And then on to Chad, but do you really believe that? In a significant sense that that's changing?
Absolutely. I think investment decisions are more and more also based on sustainability reports. I mean, they are read, they're studied, probably not by everybody, but more and more investors are considering this kind of information because they're much more impacting the future success. Now, for Siemens, as I said, it's a very, very big portion of the business. Yeah. And why is that? I mean, we are really in the high technology, power generation, mobility, building, green building technologies and things like that. So that has a major, major impact. And we simply have the technology. We have the patents. We invest every year about 5% of our revenues in R&D. We have many, many patents also for our green technologies. And that's really for us the base for the future. Our employees are very enthusiastic about sustainability and about green business. We see that in many, many activities we're doing. So they're very, very engaged by this because they see it's not just a business topic. It's great business for us, but it's more than that. They have a fantastic impact with it on a better world. And that creates a great, great passion, a stimulus, a real going forward among the employees. So I think this is a bit the base of our success. Okay. And so I'm very confident also for the future of Siemens and our green business.
Okay, Chad, thank you. Chad, you were going to comment.
So I think you're describing it's changing. So I serve on the board of Royal Dutch Shell, and I'm chair of the Corporate Social Responsibility Committee. Last month in London, we invited our sustainability-oriented investors to come to a meeting and spend all day where we were describing what we were doing, both the opportunities and the issues, and we took tough questions. Over 30% of our outstanding shares showed up in the room. So all of a sudden, we're attracted to people that care about these topics. So I think your questions are very appropriate, but it is changing. Yeah. And I think if business can sit back and complain because it doesn't change, or we can go proactively talk about it. Those Siemens in the U.S., 60,000 employees. I've seen your ads, but they are very active in the sustainability debate in the U.S. They're not just observers. And I think that's what's critical is for companies, no matter where their home base is, where they're active, they need to be active participants and bring solutions. I think the biggest thing we bring is business solutions. Much more than our rhetoric, much more than our comments, much more than our own PR. is we bring concrete solutions, the public will rise up, and they'll be our storytellers for us.
Chad. Sorry, Peter, just want to get onto that point, because what you were talking about is the sort of increased transparency and engagement. And that's what we're seeing increasingly with business, with the whole concept of radical transparency in the way that businesses, if they're not open, are having to be more open or more engaging. They can't hide behind walls anymore. They can't hide secrets in the way they could before. The world is very much changing also from that perspective. How is that sort of radical transparency pushing business to create change, that they know that they have to take the risk of their reputation being damaged much more seriously now?
Yeah, I think, the progressive companies have now all integrated different KPIs into their reporting than they did in the past, which exposes you to bad news in completely different corners than it used to. So, again, in my days at TNT, we would all of a sudden be faced by a sharp increase in fatal accidents because we had started operations in some of these developing markets. And then on the one hand, the investors would applaud you for having opened this new growth market, but then when you showed them the side effects, you all of a sudden had a completely different conversation. So it makes you more vulnerable, but on the other hand, again, once you start reporting, once you start measuring, you can also put your management systems on it, start improving it, and hopefully get to better results. I think what is going to be critical in the next few years, and again, the Council should be an important voice in that whole discussion, is how are we going to standardize non-financial reporting in companies, the so-called integrated reporting type of initiatives that are underway. They're currently still on the drawing board, but I would expect in the next 3 to 5 years, they should become the norm. And then all of a sudden, you will see that it's not only the progressive companies who decide to report this way, but it just becomes the new accounting standard. And if you then build on from that, once companies in a standardized way start reporting transparently, not only on the financial performance, but also on the sustainability performance, then you can go back to your investor community saying, okay, guys, now show us which of these sustainability KPIs are you going to apply when you make these decisions to invest or not. And that is a conversation that I know has started in the world of pension funds. Which are long-term sustainability indicators that we, the pension funds, should include in our decision-making where we allocate our investments. And these two trends coming together will need a bit of time to get it robust and to get sign-off from all the authorities and all that. But once that is available, we'll make an enormous step forward.
So, Bjorn, we have all this movement going on at different paces. We've got business movement, political movement, talk about financial movement, consumers are becoming more active. How do you see, from a systemic perspective, change happening? Do you think it's going to be organized, disorganized? Do you think it's going to suddenly everything will come together and create this sort of radical change at some point? I mean, by its nature, looking into the future is impossible, but what's your view about how change will come, given how far we've come and the sort of, what you're all saying, there's a wind in the sails now. What would the next step look like?
I don't believe it's going to be a big bang suddenly where everything is coming together. What you see are many, many actions that are moving in the same direction. And you see when we talk about reporting, how that is gradually evolving into something which becomes more meaningful and as a driver for change. In the early days of reporting, I was one of the founding board members of the Global Reporting Initiative. But it was for many years a compliance reporting. It wasn't really a management reporting. It was driven by interests that were interested in more numbers are the better, not necessarily more quality of what you report is better. And I see now how there is a movement to create more relevant information, and we are beginning to be able to measure in more standardized ways. We now have a greenhouse gas protocol. We now have just launched the Scope 3. How do you measure in the whole value chain? We've just launched this year measurement of ecosystems performance and valuing ecosystems impacts. We are now in the process of launching a tool for how do you measure water footprint. And so we are developing the building blocks into something which will be more relevant management tools going forward. But as I said before, this has happened in a rather short period of time. We created the Global Reporting Initiative in 2001. And before that, there was not really any organized way of doing it. And it's still evolving. And as Peter's saying, there are now new initiatives on integrated reporting that will develop this further. I think it's difficult. It's sometimes easy to forget that we are dealing with a business community that started addressing these issues in 1991. Before that, we were not really there, apart from individual companies that did things because it made sense to them. But as a global business community, this has all happened in the last 20 years.
Barbara, I just want to come to you in terms of, does business need to just do what it's good at, which is sort of innovation and sort of implementation and doing, or actually does business need to become more values-based? So we talk about the need for business to step up and solve society's problems and also make money. Does a new set of values need to come in? Because we used to, 150 years ago, we had many businesses which were actually based on values, and then it became very much about profit maximization. Now people are talking about the need to return to a more values-based society. What's your impression of the role of is the role of business changing in society?
I don't really think so, because if you look at sustainably successful companies that are around for many, many years successfully, they have always made a very nice trade-off between people, so employees, the planet, and the profit. And when I look back, our founder, Werner von Siemens, he shaped a very nice quotation. He said, I'm not going for the short-term profit by giving up the future. And I think when you look at many, many of the successful, sustainably successful companies, they have always done the three. And I think really looking into the future, that will continue.
And what about the companies, though, that are still very short-term based? I mean, there a lot of them around. What's going to force them to change? Because you say if those companies have been a long time, have always sort of understood the balance. I mean, some more than others probably. But what about those that don't? Are they just going to go out of business, or are they going to be forced to change? What's going to happen?
There will always be short-term business opportunities. And then it's also interesting maybe to have a company that is really there for the short term and exploiting this business opportunity also for the sake of the customers. I mean, they're always customers then at the end of the day who buy these products. But really looking at, you can look at thousands of statistics, long term, sustainability really means for a company to balance these three factors. And I think it's becoming more and more important the more global we get. If we heard from Peter, from your experience, to make business in India or China, it's a different story, but at the end of the day, it's one world, it's one standard. We have to treat the people nicely. We have to work with the right suppliers, with the right standards, because our customers at the end of the day will judge us. The media will judge us. The world will judge us. Other stakeholders will look at us. So I do think this balance of the three, it's nothing new. It's not rocket science. But it's really something sustainably successful companies have been doing, and I'm sure they will be continuing.
Okay, so that may be true, but we're still in the mess we're in.
Not in a mess. We're not in, I don't think we're in a mess at all.
Okay.
I mean, looking at Siemens, looking at other successful companies, I don't think we're in a mess.
I don't mean about companies, but if you look at the challenges we face,
right.
We're now in that state where, you say all those companies have been responsible. We're now in this state where we're facing overconsumption, where we're facing resource depletion, we're facing ecosystem degradation, we're facing loss of species, we're facing climate change, we're facing water scarcity. Now, that's not the responsibility purely of business, because obviously that we've all got to that place. But I'm just thinking about, is business got the capacity, the responsibility, the values to help get us out of that?
Well, business, as I said before, has technology. And technology is a major factor. So it's also the role of business now to use this technology and make sure we use it all over the world in the very best way. But again, it will be used where it makes a business sense. So it's again the people, the planet, and the profit that will be balanced. But I don't think we are in a mess. Yes, we have challenges, clearly. But the great story is we have the solutions. Right. So we just have to do one thing, we have to do it. And we have to roll out this technology all over the place, all over the world, and we will be better off in the future.
Peter.
I know it's always difficult and dangerous to generalize, but I think of businesses in three categories. One are the really progressive businesses, and many of those are members of this council, who have the technology, who have the values, who have the will, who have the track record to just do it because they think that's the right thing to do. And I think that's actually a more accepted and growing sector in the business community. The second category are the opportunists. They might not have the values themselves, but they see that the demand for green products or for the technologies that will make it more sustainable is going to grow. So they think, well, what the hell, we'll just go there because it will give us green growth and the green race and all these type of words. And then the third category are the people who don't believe it, or don't believe that it's business' role to be involved in these type of topics. The only way to bring those type of businesses along is to force it through regulation. And that's why it's unwise to constantly say that, well, the business will solve this and government is currently failing. We need the policymakers to make sure that the laggards are being pushed forward. And that's the cooperation we should look for.
And how do you think that should be addressed? Because one of the key areas, for instance, business federations are often very, very defensive in terms of trying to stop change from happening. So how is it best to, how are we going to move from this period where, you've got progressive businesses, you've got some, as you say, opportunists that will see the benefits and move towards it. But actually, the people who have most to lose also often have the loudest voice and often have a lot of power in the established system. So, you say you need to regulate to stop that, but often those companies have a lot of influence over those regulators in the first place, which is sometimes why we don't see the change happening. So, again...
I think, like we said before, there are so many moving parts which are currently being developed. If I just limit myself now to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, today we have launched a new positioning for the council. We've said that the tagline for this council will be business solutions for a sustainable world, which is not short of ambition, by the way. This is a promise. Business will bring solutions to make the world a more sustainable place. So the progressive businesses, the members that have now signed on to this tagline, are making this promise that we will provide the solutions. I think that's going to be a growing society. This is not just the members of this council. I recently was in a global meeting of young entrepreneurs. They have signed a declaration in which they all say that they will adhere to the values, that they will make their businesses sustainable. They're very small cells in terms of economic value at this point in time, but I think they're really at the grassroots of society and of business, providing next generations. Look at China, the importance that China has made the green economy in their economic 5-year plan. Look at the amount of Chinese businesses that are now jumping one generation of technology straight into a more sustainable one. There's all kind of movements in the business world, and I believe this progressive, opportunistic category will just lead the way. And then we'll indeed need to continue to have the dialogue with governments at the national, at the global, but certainly also at the city level, to say what are now behaviors that we should stop and where we should need regulation, whether it's environmental or emission regulation going into cities, that type of stuff is going to have to continue to be on the agenda.
Okay, Chad.
So the reason that I'm optimistic is you talk about the 200 companies that are here, the $7 trillion in sales.
Yeah.
They all have suppliers.
Yeah.
And so they can demand those suppliers perform differently. And they will, because they don't want a bad reputation of a supplier to cast a big shadow on them. And I think that's what I've heard in the last 2 days, people making that change. The second thing is we're in a totally different communications world than when Rio happened. Instant communications. YouTube might be more powerful than a lot of things we've seen. So if you're not conducting yourself the right way, it can instantly destroy your reputation. So companies that care about even living for the next quarter know that that's very critical. One thing we did in DuPont is every time we had our senior team or our board and we had to make a tough decision, I would say, just assume every one of our employees are going to observe everything that happens in this meeting, and let's make them proud of us when it's over. And what you find is that lifts people up to raise all these kinds of questions, not just how much the profit's going to be on this project.
Peter.
No, I was just giving you a pointer.
But when we talk about change generally, there is a lot of research that's been done about change. And the general conclusion of this is that we have a tendency to focus on the people that will never change. And we spend a lot of time and effort on thinking about how we can make them change. The people that are developing the theories around change, they're saying, help the ones that want to drive change. Give them credit, give them recognition, and help those people in the middle that you call opportunists to move to the change. Don't spend too much on the people that will never change, because they will never change. The only way to deal with them is then to force them or let them go out of business. But it's also the tendency with your profession to focus a lot of those guys.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I was going to bring up our profession as you were saying that, because the media never likes to talk negatively about itself. But so our site is there to help support the transformation of business. But what do you think of the role of the media? Is the media actually, we talk about people sort of where the blockages are. Is the media a problem?
Well, I would like the media to help create heroes to a growing degree and be less focused on the scandals and the problems generally. I wouldn't like to generalize and say the media is generally a problem.
But there is come after you.
But there is a tendency to focus on negative news more than the positive news, I would say.
Chad, would you like to give us a bit of a kicking?
Well, of course not. but look, you miss some opportunities.
Yeah.
You give a weather report. That would be a time to educate people about things about the environment more than just is it going to rain tomorrow, because you've got people listening. So I'd say the media should look at all of its opportunities of where you can give more contribution to society without really changing your whole business model.
Okay, thank you. We've got to finish in a minute, but I just wanted to just end with asking each of you to just give your prediction for where we'll be in 10 years. So 10 years is a long time, but it's not so far ahead. So Bjorn, just very briefly, knowing what you know, knowing the journey we've come on, in 10 years' time, if we were sitting here, what do you think you would be saying?
Well, that is a very difficult question to someone who's been around for 20 years and been wrong on many predictions. I think my gut feeling is we will be surprised on how quickly things will move, because we are coming to a number of crunch points in key systems. And I think we will see critical consequences of that will trigger a faster change. So I think I will be surprised when I look at how much has actually happened over the next 10 years.
Peter, where do you think we'll be in 10 years? What will you be saying?
My hope is that we will be at a place where finally we understand that the sustainability crisis is a crisis for us humans. This is not a debate about is it the fault of the politicians or the business or anybody else, but this is a crisis that is threatening all of us. So the only way to solve that crisis is by working together. And it might be tough to get there in Rio, but soon thereafter, I would expect we come to that recognition. We're then able to bring the power of business in a framework where it can provide solutions, not just in nice little pockets of sustainability or corporate social responsibility, but in a real effort and a real start of seeing us scale it up. So in 10 years, I don't think we will have solved it, but I would hope to be in a position that we're optimistic about our chance to do it.
Great, thank you. Barbara?
Well, I think in 10 years from now, my wish is that we don't have this kind of discussions anymore on sustainability, but sustainability is mainstream. Yeah. It's mainstream for the political agenda, but it's also mainstream for business. That's my wish for 10 years.
Chad?
I think we'll be in Shanghai, maybe New Delhi, but seriously, I believe the water, energy, food combination will be understood by every school child. It will be a topic in almost every edition of your paper.
Thank you very much to all of you. Really appreciate it, and thank you for the people who've been listening. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much.
You're good.
Thanks a lot.
I'm unfortunately on the board.
I'm going to read your